We begin with a closely watched diplomatic face-off between two world powers often at odds. U.S. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin are holding talks in the Swiss city of Geneva at a time when relations between their countries are said to be at their lowest point since the Cold War.
Господин президент, хочу вас поблагодарить за вашу инициативу.
I think it's always better to meet face-to-face.
The world powers have been at loggerheads over Russia's annexation of Ukraine's Crimea Peninsula, massive cyber attacks on U.S. government agencies and companies, and alleged interference in U.S. presidential elections. Biden is expected to convey his concerns over those issues and urge Putin to take action. Putin will likely repeat his denials of any government involvement in cyber attacks or meddling in elections. But both have indicated their willingness to establish a framework for dialogue about areas of mutual interest, such as arms control and nuclear disarmament. And earlier, Newsroom Tokyo's Yoshioka Takuma spoke with NHK's Washington correspondent Tsuji Kohei and Moscow bureau chief Matsuo Hiroshi in Geneva.
Some are questioning if this meeting will do anything to mend the frayed relationship. At best, it may only keep things from getting worse. So, Kohei, what is President Biden's intention?
President Biden thinks talking to President Putin directly would be the best way to improve the relationship with Russia, which he has described as low point. He understands that this summit meeting alone is not enough to improve the ties, but hopes to prevent the relationship from getting worse. And behind all this is China. That is the biggest threat to the U.S. In order to focus on China, the U.S. wants to avoid a situation where it faces major challenges on two fronts. In other words, Russia. Given the problems over Ukraine and cyber attacks, the U.S. needs to take a tough stance, but he also seeks ways to improve the ties. President Biden is trying to walk a very fine line between these two goals.
Thank you, Kohei. Now let's turn to Russia. Hiroshi, what does President Putin want to achieve?
Putin hopes to demonstrate Russia's standing to its people and the world by showing a commitment to tackling global issues alongside the United States. He is keen to start dialogue in the areas where U.S. and Russian interests converge, such as nuclear disarmament. Putin seems to want to convince the U.S. to recognize Russia as an essential partner. He may believe the U.S. could eventually ease economic sanctions on his country. The deepening conflict between the U.S. and China provides Russia with an opportunity. Putin will use these talks to find out whether the United U.S. might to make concessions.
China has suggested it needs to respond strongly to the G7 communique over the weekend that took aim at Beijing. It comes as Chinese aircraft entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone on Tuesday. Taiwan's defense ministry reported incursions by 28 jets, including fighters and bombers. It says that's the largest ever number for one day. The move follows the G7 leaders referencing the Taiwan Strait in their statement.
China will never tolerate attempts to seek independence or intervention in the Taiwan issue from foreign forces.
The spokesperson said China needs to respond to such acts of collusion. The G7 communique stressed the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. China's government says it's strongly dissatisfied with and firmly opposed to such interference. We move now to politics here in Japan, where the ordinary session of the Diet has closed with a general election on the horizon. Opposition parties have sought to extend the session and launched a no-confidence motion against Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide's cabinet. Their efforts failed, and that means there'll be few opportunities to debate the government's pandemic response before lower house lawmakers see their terms expire in October. Now, before that happens, Tokyo will hold a Metropolitan Assembly election and host the Olympics and Paralympics. Senior members of the ruling coalition have implied the Prime Minister will not dissolve the lower house and call an election until after those major events. Now, the best timing will depend on a number of things: the spread of the coronavirus, progress in vaccination efforts, and the cabinet's plunging public approval ratings. The Japanese government is planning to lift a coronavirus state of emergency for Tokyo and 8 other prefectures on Monday and make a transition to a state of quasi-emergency. Only Okinawa will remain under the declaration. The government will finalize measures after consulting an advisory panel on Thursday. The declaration has seen some businesses close early and others close altogether. Bars and restaurants have been asked to suspend serving alcohol. Tokyo reported 501 new cases on Wednesday, up 61 from a week ago. Overall, the trend is down, but the rate is slowing. Osaka Prefecture in western Japan is also struggling with a slowing decline in infections.
We are in a situation where we have to prevent a resurgence by all means.
Nationwide, more than 1,700 new cases were confirmed on Wednesday. 78 deaths were reported. The total number of patients in serious conditions stands at around 800. One antivirus measure that's under consideration is the cap on attendees for large events. For now, prefectures under restrictions are asking organizers to impose a 5,000-person limit. The government plans to set the limit at 10,000 in areas where the restrictions are fully lifted. But rules for the biggest upcoming event remain up in the air. Sources say the Tokyo Games organizers plan to hold the Olympic and Paralympic Games with domestic spectators. They'll set a policy on the limit of their numbers by the end of June. Turning to Myanmar, where the state-run media says several coronavirus variants have been detected in the country. State-run television reports cases involving the Delta variant, first identified in India, and the Alpha variant, initially identified in Britain, had been confirmed. It says a total of 11 people infected with the variants had been found in 4 regions. The news comes as healthcare workers have increasingly been joining the civil disobedience movement against the military coup. The lack of healthcare workers has made it difficult to determine how high the infection rate is, as the number of tests performed has dropped to around a tenth the number carried out before the coup. Health authorities warn there's been a clear increase in the number of new cases since late last month, even though the number of tests being conducted is limited. Concern is mounting the virus, and especially the variants, could spread further at a time when the country's healthcare system is under pressure due to the continuing unrest. Now to Jakarta, Indonesia, where people often use a pair of puppet figures called ondel-ondel to ward off evil spirits at celebrations. But locals are worried the tradition is being abused after some street performances ended in arrests. NHK World's Chitra Paramaisti has more.
Sri Rezuki is a victim of the times. She lost her job as a maid last year as the coronavirus pandemic devastated the economy. Desperate for money, she started panhandling with her friends. They entertained passerby with an ondel-ondel figure. But their performances fall short of tradition, using recorded music instead of musicians. Sri lives in the Jakarta slum. Her husband also panhandles while using an ondel-ondel. The police detained him and sent him to a rehabilitation facility for about 10 days. The couple's story is a familiar one in Jakarta these days. A growing number of jobless people are taking to the street to earn some money, and many are being arrested, as panhandling is illegal.
When I see the police, I feel scared I might get arrested. I don't want to live like this. I want a job.
Sri's group even went to another province to escape the police. On this day, she collected about $5 after almost 12 hours of soliciting.
Ondel-ondel is traditional performance, but I only do this for money.
The police aren't the only ones who want the panhandling activities to stop. Some people are upset about what they see as abuse of a tradition. Denny Al-Fatir is head of traditional ondel-ondel group. He took over his duties from his grandfather. They make the puppets and perform the dances. He is frustrated by the panhandlers and their activities, but he says he cannot condemn people who are in need.
If they perform ondel-ondel, they should follow the proper methods from the time of our ancestors. But they say they are doing it for a living, so I don't want to cause a row.
Danish group recently did a performance in central Jakarta. They also gave out hundreds of light meals.
Rather than just begging for money, I want them to understand that we are willing to share. We will continue our efforts to protect the traditional culture.
Indonesians are waiting for the pandemic to end. Then, the sight and sound of ondel-ondel performances will make them feel happy, instead of reminding them of the harsh economic conditions. Citra Paramaisi, NHK World, Jakarta.
Next in weather, scorching conditions are hitting California and other parts of the western United States. Our meteorologist Jonathan O has the details in our World Weather Report.
Hello, we are seeing a big heat wave that's impacting the western areas of the United States, and we're not seeing anything in terms of rain, and we're seeing some serious drought problems and wildfires that have also been impacted the western areas of the country. I want to take you over into California, where people are trying to deal with this heat, as it is baking hot weather hitting California on Tuesday. It brought temperatures of over 40 degrees Celsius in some areas. The famous Santa Monica Beach was full of people who wanted to cool themselves off, and other residents were fortunate enough to visit outdoor pools, as many of them have just opened for the first time in a long time. The heat is worsening the wildfire situation in the western U.S., with the scorching hot weather likely to remain into Sunday. And this particular map showing us the red colors, particularly seeing the huge disparity of really hot weather, really moving into the desert Southwest and into Southern California, even northern portions of California into places near San Francisco, could see 40-degree highs. So it is quite hot. Meanwhile, we're keeping an eye out on this little developing system near Mexico. There is a 60% chance that this can become a tropical system and moving its way toward the southern United States. And so the model forecast here, going toward the end of this week and the weekend, likely to gather itself and bring a significant amount of rain into the Gulf Coast. And so we'll have to keep an eye out on that. Hot weather into Denver with a high of 36, 47 in Las Vegas, and we're looking at highs into the mid-20s from New York into D.C. as we go into Thursday. Meanwhile, we talked about some rain that was rolling through the western and eastern areas of Japan. We are expecting this to continue to push its way out. Behind it, we should be seeing a little bit of clearing for the western areas, but the rain will likely stay around in Tokyo as we head into Thursday. But then we'll see a little bit of a break for Tokyo before rain returns for all of Japan by the weekend. Hope you have a good day wherever you are.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin met in Geneva as relations between their countries are at an all-time low. Israeli military aircraft strike Hamas militant targets in the Gaza Strip. The action comes just weeks after a ceasefire to end an 11-day war. Indonesia's Climate and Geophysical Agency warns of aftershocks and a possible tsunami after a 6.1 earthquake hits near the Maluku Islands. And German researchers said Tuesday that Arctic ice is decreasing at a rate faster than earlier believed, while releasing results of a year-long study.
Both the US and Russian presidents have spoken positively about their talks in Geneva. President Biden said he'd identified areas of mutual interest, but also said he'd told Mr. Putin the US would respond to actions that threaten its interests. Vladimir Putin has described the summit as productive, but denied that Russia had a role in a series of cyber attacks against US institutions. Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has warned that a low turnout in Friday's presidential election might encourage what he called the country's enemies. He urged people to show their support and vote. The French footballer Paul Pogba has become the latest Euro 2020 star to go viral for removing a bottle from a news conference. Pogba, who is a practicing Muslim, placed a Heineken beer under the table a day after Cristiano Ronaldo removed 2 bottles of Coca-Cola.